Welcome to Alpha Wolf Trading. Did you know that there's over 12,000 stocks or companies that trade on the OTC? Between the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange, you have over 7,000 companies. But us as retail investors, we wouldn't know that unless we were researching. Because why? Wall Street focuses on the elite, the big companies. And where the retail investor has their advantage is in small and micro-cap stocks. Why? Because you have the opportunity to speak directly with leadership. That is what this is all about here at Alpha Wolf Trading. We're trying to find the hidden gems, and we interview the executive teams of companies that we think meet the parameters to be those hidden gems. I also want to make sure you understand that this is not a paid-for promotion. I collect no compensation for the interviews I do here. These companies that I interview have been identified as potential opportunities for me and the members of Alpha Wolf Trading to receive a higher than average return on our investment. These companies I have identified either because of a technical setup on a chart, a fundamental change within the organization, new management team, new products, all kinds of different things that actually lead me here. But what do I think is the most important? Leadership. And that is why I do these interviews. I want to understand what drives the person that is leading the charge. I want to feel their passion. I want to understand their vision and the strategy that they're going to use to achieve success. That is what these interviews are for. I want to understand the share structure and the cap table, the size of the TAM, the total addressable market. This is the opportunity to learn all of those things. So sit back and enjoy. And if you learn anything from today's interview, do us a favor. Subscribe to the Alpha Wolf Trading YouTube channel. This video is for educational and entertainment purposes only. I am not a financial advisor. I recommend highly that before buying any security, speak to a financial advisor and do your own due diligence. Hey everybody, Tim from Alpha Wolf Trading coming at you with a brand new company. Got damn near the whole C-suite here. Got Michael Richman and Tim Meyer from NextCure, which is going to seem odd to a lot of people because I don't do a lot of biotech on my YouTube channel, but this is a unique story. So NextCure, the ticker symbol is NXTC. And Michael, Tim, thank you for coming in and giving us some of your time.
Well, thanks, Tim. It's a pleasure to be here, and we greatly appreciate you giving us the opportunity to tell our story. And thanks for seeing the light on biotech.
So it's been a rough market, right, for small and micro caps. And I think biotech actually was the sector that kind of led small caps down, right? And we've been living in this for now about 38 months, and it hasn't been fun, right? Very challenging environment for small and micro cap names. What makes NextCure different is one, well, Michael, actually, why don't you give us a little background on NextCure and how you actually wound up here?
Definitely. Well, again, I'm Mike Richman, President and CEO of NextCure and one of the founders. And today I'm also joined by our Chief Operating Officer, Dr. Tim Meyer, also one of the founders. And it's great to be here. For those of you that may not be able to see us, Tim and I don't have much hair. So we've been doing this for a long time. We have a passion for biotech. And while we've lived through lots of cycles economically, the problems continue to persist. You know, we have an aging population, there are chronic diseases, And NextCure was discovered or started about 8 years ago to help develop novel, first-in-class proprietary drugs to meet the challenges of some of the difficult diseases that we're faced with today. We're focused on cancer and a number of different tumor types that we're happy to get into. Also, we've got a program in Alzheimer's disease and also in bone metabolism. A little bit about my background. I've been doing this for 40 years. And for those of you that have studied the history of biotech, that means I was there when the industry got started in San Francisco. Just at around the same time, Silicon Valley was taking off, and we were learning about how to use personal computers. But Genentech had gotten started, and a company on the other side of the bay was Chiron. And this was a company that helped develop a number of the early products related to HIV, hepatitis, beta interferon, interleukin-2 for renal cancer. And as a young person, I had the opportunity to see a company go from about 40 people to about 6,000 in about 12 years. And over that 12-year period, I worked as a yeast biologist. I helped develop, filed some of the leading intellectual property patents during that period of time, and soon learned the value of technology and translating it into products. Then moved into business development. During that period of time, I noticed the BD people seemed to be going to all these neat local restaurants in San Francisco, and the scientists and legal people were being left out. So I joined the business development group, and that really gave me clear insight in what it was like to start a company, to take a project, to lead it through product development, and to launch it from a commercial perspective. After about 12 years, I moved to the East Coast to start a company, MedImmune. Chiron at the time had merged with Cetus and was being sold to Novartis. MedImmune was about 75 people. During about 6 years, I headed up business development and legal strategic planning, and we launched Synagis, the first monoclonal antibody against an infectious disease for premature infants. It was called RSV, respiratory syncytial virus. Many people that have had flu or COVID are now familiar with RSV. During that period, it was pioneering to imagine that you could take a novel therapy and administer it to premature infants. So it was somewhat revolutionary during that period of time. The company ultimately got sold to AstraZeneca, and I kept realizing I like small companies. They just kept getting bigger and bigger and getting sold. But we created a lot of value during that time period. I then helped start a company called Macrogenics here in the Maryland area. That company is still going on. It's been going on for about 20 plus years. That was focused on monoclonal antibodies and some of the key technologies that we apply today that have been successful in developing some of the key products in cancer, autoimmunity, infectious diseases. After about 5 years there, learned a lot. Got to meet my colleague Tim Mayer during that period of time. Then started a company out of Johns Hopkins. This company was Amplimune. The company's kept getting bigger, and I wanted to keep getting smaller. Amplimune was pretty much at the forefront of modern day immuno-oncology. We had discovered or had been working on a product called anti-PD-1. This is Merck's multi-billion-dollar product, Keytruda, also known as Pembro. We were a little bit early in that time period. But the company over a 6-year period grew very, very quickly, and we ultimately had an exit and sold the company to AstraZeneca. So I kept coming back to AstraZeneca. So fast forward about 8 years ago, we were hanging out with some of the leading scientists at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, and decided to start NextCure. And NextCure, the vision was going to be a little different. We wanted to go back to old school biotech thinking and to build a fully integrated organization. And fully integrated mean we would do our own discovery, we would do our own development of products, our own manufacturing. We built a manufacturing facility, our own clinical development. And we've been focused on developing novel oncology products for a number of the large unmet needs in various cancer types, such as colorectal cancer, cancer types impacting women's health, ovarian cancer, breast cancer. And then kind of fast forward over the years, we then looked at applying our technology and our integrated infrastructure towards diversifying into other areas such as bone metabolism and neuro. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. We were fortunate to take off very quickly, raised a lot of capital, about $450 million. Our last raise was at the end of 2019. We haven't raised money in 5 years. We still have about $96 million of cash on the balance sheet, which brings us into the second half of 26. So we're well positioned as an organization to move forward with our programs. So maybe I'll pause there. Tim, maybe you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. So again, Tim Mayer, Chief Operating Officer, as Michael said, one of the co-founders of NextCure. So I've been with the organization since its inception. Formerly trained as a microbiologist, immunologist with a PhD from Penn State University College of Medicine in Hershey, PA. And I originally located to the Maryland area to do a postdoctoral fellowship at the NCI. And when I finished my postdoctoral fellowship, I joined industry, and I have largely been building companies in the Maryland area for a little bit more than 25 years. When I joined industry, I actually started as a bench-level scientist, worked for one of the biggest reagent companies in Maryland called Life Technologies. And unlike Michael, who went from a small company to being acquired by a big company, I went from a big company to being acquired by a small company. A small little reagent company out of California called Invitrogen had acquired Life Technology, and that really changed the business quite a bit. So after several years at the bench, I took an absolute golden opportunity that was presented to me, and I had reinvented myself on the business side of biotech, and I've largely been again building businesses in the greater Maryland area for about 25 years. As Michael said, we overlapped at Macrogenics for a number of years, but I continued to work for them for just under 15 years, and then left there and ultimately started NextCure. And as Michael said, we had a different vision to go back to the drawing board and to build a biotech company that worked from the basic discovery all the way up to GMP manufacturing and ultimately clinical development. And here we are today.
Okay, that is quite a road for both of you guys, right? But I think what stands out to me is I don't think you guys could have raised, did you say $450 million without the background that y'all have, right?
Yeah, we were very fortunate. I guess that one thing that comes with age and experience is connections and a network. We had engaged with many, many investors, over our careers. Many had said no over time, but sooner or later, depending on the science, depending on the team and the vision of the organization, you align a syndicate of investors that share that vision. And we were very fortunate when we started NextCure. We knew that we were taking early technology that we were trying to translate into novel products that would have a major multi-billion-dollar impact in the marketplace. In fact, two of our lead investors was Pfizer and Lilly themselves. So two major pharma companies that saw the vision that we were taking. We were also able to bring in investments from Canaan Partners, a VC group that funds a lot of startup companies, predominantly in the Northeast, and then OrbiMed, as well as Sofinova. So we had a really good syndicate to start out with, and that, along with having some really good ideas and a well-respected team, I think created the chemistry for a good start.
Okay, so bring us up to speed as to where we are right now today. What are the real exciting things that you feel as though you have on the table?
Yeah, so like most of these, young biotechnology companies, we've had our ups and downs with the, evolving economic environment out there. But, the fundamentals of what we do as an organization are strong. We've got full capabilities in everything from doing research, product development, and as Tim mentioned, clinical development. So currently we've got 2 key programs in the pipeline. Our first is called NC410. This is a protein called LAIR2 that, when combined with Merck's Pembro, is being developed in colorectal cancer and in ovarian cancer. Earlier this year, we had seen 2 out of 19 patients respond to the therapy. That got us very excited. We added an additional 20 patients that we followed through, and we'll be reporting on those 40 some odd patients at the ASCO conference in early June. We also have decided to continue another arm to the study in ovarian cancer patients. Earlier this year, a small number of patients, but we saw 3 partial responses out of 7 patients. So we're in the process now of enrolling additional ovarian cancer patients to see if we can reproduce some of those early findings. So while it's still early in the game, we're excited about the impact that we're having with NC410, and hopefully as the data evolves and as we continue to enroll patients, we'll look forward to the outcome of those 2 respective trials. The second part of the pipeline has gotten a lot of attention for people in the biotech community. This is what we call LNCB74. This is a B7H4 target. That's an ADC. ADC stands for antibody drug conjugate. It's probably one of the hottest areas of biotech right now, based on a number of successes that some of the large pharma companies have seen. Daiichi Sankyo, AstraZeneca, Merck. You've seen a wave of acquisitions and mergers in the ADC space. Why is this important? Well, ADCs are basically kind of merging the best of antibodies and the specificity of taking an antibody and getting it to a tumor cell, but conjugating or linking it to a chemotherapeutic agent, a toxic. So what we've done in the case of LNCB4, we've taken an antibody targeting B7H4. This is a molecule or protein that's overexpressed on many different tumor types. Predominantly, you see it in breast cancer, the gynecological cancers, you see it in lung. And what we've done is, working with our partner Ligochem, is we've conjugated or added a chemotherapeutic agent attached to the antibody. We've also aligned it with what they call a linker system. So in between the antibody and the toxin, also called the payload, we have a linker system. And what this molecule does when administered into the body, it's like a missile. It traffics through the blood, and the antibody, when it gets to the tumor, it recognizes B7H4. The candidate is internalized into the tumor. An enzyme then cleaves the linker and releases the payload. So it's kind of this toxin that specifically targets the tumor cell. And what we've seen with other programs in developing ADCs, so with some really, really good data clinically, we've seen about 30 to 40% response rates in a number of different tumor types. Since these are toxic, you have to manage the safety profile very carefully. But this is a really, really exciting area. Tim and I and our CFO, Steve, who's not with us today, but we've been talking to a lot of investors. It's getting a lot of attention. So those 2 cancer programs have been the predominant focus of where we are today. Now, in addition to these areas, we've been working in some other non-oncology areas that are getting a lot of attention, somewhat serendipitously. One is our neuro program. This is an antibody that targets something called ApoE. And a paper came out in Nature Medicine 2 weeks ago that was pretty much covered in all the newspapers. So what is ApoE? ApoE is a genetic marker that defines the predisposition of those individuals, or some of those individuals, that could succumb to Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's is a neurodegenerative disease, and sadly really creates dementia and loss of memory in many individuals. So why are we so excited about this program? Well,
brutal disease.
Yes. So what's really exciting, and really the phone's been kind of ringing off the hook, because the news is out. We happened to 4 years ago link up with David Holtzman, who's a professor and researcher at Washington University in St. Louis. Dave is one of the leading researchers today in Alzheimer's. So how did an oncology company get into the neurospace? Well, maybe we were a little crazy, but we're scientifically driven. We saw the opportunity well before others. We were reading the papers, we were talking to the experts. And it's one of those programs where you kind of just act quickly because you see the vision, you see the opportunity, and then you kind of go back and you say, oh, by the way, we've decided to take on this program. So we've been incubating it in stealth for a period of time. We're now in discussions with a number of partners that have seen the potential value and the impact this may have on Alzheimer's patients. So that's kind of moving forward slowly, on the partnering front. And then another program, we're working on NC605. This is a program related to bone metabolism. And, I'll try not to tickle anyone's funny bone here, but this is really a fascinating program where we have an antibody targeting something called Siglec-15 that's expressed on cell types called osteoclasts. So osteoclasts are these cells involved in maintaining bone homeostasis or bone metabolism. And the osteoclasts absorb bone. And you have other cells called osteoblasts that create bone. And when you get dysregulation, you're absorbing more bone, and your bones become more brittle, and you're much more susceptible to fractures. So what we've done here in NextCure is we've actually done some exquisite studies in animals where we can decrease bone resorption, but more importantly, increase bone formation and quality bone. And so we've taken this candidate. We're actually in toxicology studies now. We plan on taking this into the clinic in an area, a disease called osteogenesis imperfecta. This is an orphan disease, also called brittle bones disease, that impacts actually a fairly large number of patients that succumb to an increase in bone fractures. And our goal is to ultimately take this into the osteogenesis imperfecta patient population, and then hopefully expand into other chronic bone diseases like osteoarthritis and osteoporosis. So as you can see, we've got a pretty strong focused pipeline in oncology. Our lead program, NC410, will have readouts in June at ASCO and later this year in the ovarian cancer cohort. We also have the ADC program where we'll be filing the IND, the investigational new drug, with the FDA later this year. We'll have clinical data in 2025. And then behind those two, we're looking for strategic partners for the bone and neuro programs, each which really address some really important medical areas. So I'll pause there, Tim.
I think that was a fantastic summation of what you got. So you got a few things going on.
Yes.
And you sit in a very, so let me ask you a question, because you have been doing this for so long. You mentioned several companies that got acquired by larger companies, right? And I think back then, pharma companies were much quicker to acquire, right? If you were like phase 1, phase 2, and you had some good clinical data, they weren't afraid to step up and pull the trigger and pay up to pick up that company, right? Have you seen a change in that behavior with the big pharmas?
Yeah, it's a really good question. When you've been doing it as long as we have, you study trends. You study financial trends, you study scientific trends, you study organizational changes. So yeah, the whole concept of the food chain, I think, has evolved. In the early days of biotech, pharma had their internal R&D programs, but they only had limited output, and about 2/3 of their programs that ended up developing into products were in-licensed from other companies. So when biotech took off, there was a lot closer interactions between small biotechnology companies and pharma companies from a collaborative perspective. Deals were done at an earlier stage, and pharma companies would commit to helping develop those programs during fairly high-risk periods. So fast forward over the decades, now there's a lot more biotechnology companies. There's still a limited number of pharma companies because over the decades, they've merged among themselves. So you have fewer partnerable companies out there, and they can be very selective. So over the years, they've acquired the technology and brought a lot of that in-house. And so now what they do is they wait a little bit longer till these biotechnology companies actually have clinical data. So that de-risks the programs. And at that point, that's when you see the billion-dollar acquisitions, where you hear, every week there's a company getting acquired. It's usually because they've generated some very interesting, promising, robust clinical data, and it looks like it's on its way to a product, and that's where the pharmaceutical companies come in. You see fewer and fewer early-stage collaborative deals. And this is why you see some of the smaller companies in this crunch, because they have to raise more capital to get through what we call the valley of death and to get into the clinic. That takes time, it takes capital, and not all companies can do that. So from that standpoint, things have changed. Things have also changed that when we started this industry, it was pretty domestic. You had some pharmaceutical companies like, AstraZeneca and GSK and Novo Nordisk in Europe. You had, Takeda and Astellas and Daiichi Sankyo in Japan. China, pretty much was not into biotech at the time. So now fast forward, you have a lot of infrastructure in China, in South Korea. So the global environment in which we do research, in which we do product development, has evolved. And when you have a greater supply of companies, that's going to put a lot of pressure and demand on human capital, who gets the talent pool, financial capital, where are investors putting their money. And so that's kind of brings us to where we are today. There's really a lot of companies, but what you're starting to see is an adaptation of these companies, kind of going back to the old ways. You can't do it all on your own. You have to collaborate, you have to partner, and you're starting to see that with different companies from different regions, and applying different technologies, looking for synergies, looking for co-development opportunities to kind of advance those programs so that you can generate the clinical data and then get the large exits. I think also, we've seen much fewer IPOs in the biotech industry, or IPOs in general. I think that stems from investors have a lot of choices now. When we started the industry, it was biotech or pretty much IT Silicon Valley. these days investors are investing in next generation batteries, artificial intelligence, plant-based foods, beyond just biotech and looking at, computer-based technologies. So I think that a lot of these competitive forces have kind of put a lot of pressure on young companies, and it's going to take a little bit of time for them to evolve. The good thing for NextCure is, we have strong programs in areas of unmet medical need. We have a infrastructure and team focused on partnering, and we've got a strong balance sheet and a real strong board and network of people that we could pull on. So, from a young company perspective, we still see and feel, some of the pressures out there, but we feel that we're really well positioned to navigate through these challenging times.
So to develop a new drug, right? I remember this from years ago, and I don't know what it is today, so I guess that's why I'm presenting it. But it used to be somewhere around 7 years, right, to go through the process of development, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then I think it was 7 years and about $7 billion. Does that sound about accurate to get to an approved drug?
Yeah, I think it sounds accurate. It depends on the drug. If it's maybe a Me Too type of drug, obviously that time period and cost can be a little bit somewhat minimized. If it's something really novel, you'll see that it could take 10 to 12 years and, and definitely billions of dollars.
Right.
The concern about the investment in these drugs these days is that there's so many companies around the world that the competitive forces facing companies is greater. So what impact does that have? Well, when you look at the economic life of a drug in the past, you would most likely live well through your patent life, 17 years originally, and then it moved to 20 years from the filing date. So you would launch a product and have pretty much exclusivity for a period of time. I mean, if you look at what AbbVie has done with Humira, their anti-TNF, which is a multi-billion dollar franchise. Now you can see, the competition coming in and really will start, whittling down their market share over time. So I think the costs are still there. Things are not getting less expensive. Now, over time, you'll hear artificial intelligence. It's going to accelerate things. It's going to make things faster. It's going to make things less expensive. Maybe, I don't think in the short term. I think we're going to see these AI play very important roles in helping identify patients that will be most responsive to drugs. So that may bring down the development costs, but we're in an expensive business. And it's expensive to develop the products because we have to manage the risk profile of failures. Right. And then over time, the cost of drugs are still, have a significant impact on any government spend. So you're going to constantly see pressures, but I think it opens up opportunities, for an entrepreneur. We have an aging population. With age comes, unfortunately, illnesses, and those illnesses are going to catalyze continued investment in healthcare to not only, morally or ethically help to treat these patients, but also to develop novel, therapies and products. And you're starting to see that. Like, for example, our neuro program, fascinating. It's not something we talked a lot about historically, but the stories we're hearing from investors, it hits a chord like no other therapeutic area that I've worked in, and I've worked in most of them. The reason is they've seen a parent or relative or friend suffer from dementia. And these investors, and we're talking to a number of them now, saying, you got to get this program moving. You can't stop it. So we're actually, Tim and I have been working away, putting a whole new strategy together because it's an adaptation of taking the great science, understanding the market, understanding the healthcare needs, recognizing the investor base that's interested in the neuro space. So it's going to create a huge opportunity. And for many of us in biotech, we see waves. We don't surf, but we see these waves of technology, and we study trends. Tim and I are like, we're saying, like, what's the trend of the day, or these days the trend of the minute? And I think right now, we're in this antibody drug conjugate wave. Very exciting, a lot of investment, a lot of new programs. But I think what you're seeing now is this neuro wave. It almost gets on your nerves, no pun intended. So how do you know this wave is coming? Well, first of all, when you look at starting, any technology-oriented company, one of the best things to do is just travel the United States and go to universities. I know this sounds weird. Which buildings are going up? So, years ago, you saw all these molecular biology buildings. You knew the world was focused on sequencing the human genome. Then all of a sudden, you saw all these IT companies and filled with computers, and you realized, oh, wow, computers are here to stay. And then all of a sudden, other buildings went up. Oh, no, those were coffee shops. But then you saw these other buildings come up, these neuro buildings. And it's like, what's going on? Well, we've just trained a whole generation of neuroscientists. So what are they doing? Well, some of them are doing research. Some of them are actually investing. But so now you have this workforce focused on understanding a disease that we weren't really focused on in the past. Pharma was getting out of it. Now everyone's getting back into it. We have new tools on looking at the genetics of the disease, looking at the pathology of the disease. We've got new devices to look at scans. Our bone program, we can look at bone scans and bone density. The PET technology to look at brain scans, to look at plaques that people have when they succumb to Alzheimer's disease. Look at new technologies to map out tumors and how various cells are infiltrating into what we call the tumor microenvironment. So all these devices and tools are really going to come in to the healthcare system, which will give us better means to diagnose patients and monitor therapies. And we're going to be able to tap into this. Another thing people will start reading about is something called biomarkers. So what is a biomarker? A biomarker is usually like a protein or some substance in your body. It's usually in the blood that you can measure. This is when people have diabetes. You can measure something that informs you that you're a diabetic. In the case of Alzheimer's disease, we can look at various markers within the blood itself, looking at spinal fluid. Although hopefully we get away from that. Spinal taps are pretty painful. And then obviously coupled with brain scans. So you're seeing a triangulation of devices and tools, biomarkers, and new drugs. And right in that middle of that triangle, you're now seeing AI. And the AI people, they're trying to figure it out. You see a lot of investment going in. And what the AI people are doing now, which is fascinating, and we're talking to a lot of these groups, they now have access to huge databases of information. So these are databases from huge hospital conglomerates and insurance companies. So unlike when I was a kid, most of my healthcare records, they were on a piece of paper in someone's file. So now you have generations of data that have been digitized electronically in EHRs, electronic health records, or EMRs, electronic medical records. And now what the AI people are doing are they're developing algorithms to analyze this data. In fact, I'll give you a real life example. We were just talking to a company related to bone. So now we can look at tens of thousands of patients and look at their x-rays. So we can look at, did they get a fracture? How bad was the fracture? Where was the fracture? What was the frequency of fracture? How old was the patient? Was it a man? Was it a woman? Was it a child? Did they have any predisposition of other diseases? Were they eating too many Twinkies? No, we don't know about the Twinkies. But so now you could take all this data and now you can start asking questions that we couldn't ask for before. Are there certain patient segments that have certain markers or certain genes that may make them more responsive to a certain therapy. And this is exactly what we're seeing now in the neurospace, this ApoE gene. It's in about, 20% of, Alzheimer's patients that, will unfortunately get the disease. But now we have a marker that we could screen for, we could detect, and we could then take those patients and put them into our therapy for NC181 that will be most responsive. So you're seeing this huge convergence of all of these technologies. So when people say, well, you can't, you need to focus. Well, we have to focus, but as soon as you focus, there's someone out there that's going to leapfrog over you, because the modalities that people are applying in biotech, whether it's monoclonal antibodies like what we do, whether it's cell therapy like the company you recently introduced us to, whether it's gene therapy. There's a field just the other day, Tim and I, we were talking about, and something I hadn't really thought about, but the context of lipidomics, lipids, fats. Well, we all have fat in our body, and it's important. But when it's dysregulated, we either gain weight, and this is why the GLP-1 weight loss drugs are becoming so popular. But, for many years, people knew about atherosclerosis. It was a word people were comfortable with. It meant your arteries had plaques. You probably had some dysregulation of cholesterol within your system. So what is a plaque? Well, a plaque is kind of a buildup of tissue and creates blockages. Well, you see the same thing in the brain. This is what Alzheimer's patients have. They have plaque buildup in the brain. None of us, because we're all good thinkers. But anyway, over time, that plaque is going to build up. So what we're trying to do is understand lipid biology and how to counteract the buildup of plaque, and more importantly, how to prevent it. So the science that we're seeing out there, biotech is here to stay. There are companies, you don't know where the winds are going to come from, but there's a lot of companies collaborating, converging, and really working at cutting edge, or developing cutting edge ways to developing these next generation therapies.
Do you think COVID helped or hurt biotech?
Great question. So I actually got my background in vaccines. So you think about a vaccine. When you're born, you can't really make decisions. Your parents make it for you. Then you come to the pediatrician. What do? They shoot you in the rear with all these vaccines, right? And these days, there's like 12 of them. You get measles, mumps, rubella, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, polio, hepatitis, COVID now, RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, and the list goes on. And these vaccines have revolutionized modern day health. And this is why many of us live as long as we do, because we're able to prevent diseases. And the vaccine field continues to make really important contributions. So let's get back to COVID. Well, first of all, COVID, respiratory virus, it was tragic. We will see other epidemics. The viruses are not going away. It's not like they were on vacation and to haunt us, and then they pack their bags and they're hiding. They're here to stay. And we're going to see more because of the environmental changes that are impacting animals, rodents, bats, others. So you're seeing a lot of these viruses that historically found their homes in animals are starting now to get into chickens, into cows, and to humans. And you know what? Viruses mutate. They're like those running backs that you can't tackle. They just keep going. So COVID, I think it did things in many ways. One is we can look at it scientifically. Two is we can look at it socially. Three, politically. And four, economically. So scientifically, we lucked out. Moderna wasn't much of a company before COVID, and they just were at the right place at the right time with the right technology, along with other companies where we were able to develop COVID vaccines. So that was great. Socially, well, we had this mass movement that, people stopped believing in vaccines. How could you? This is what we all live for. We all want to prevent a disease. Whether it's an infectious disease, we want to prevent cancer, we want to prevent Alzheimer's. It's all critical. Politically, people use that social division, for political gains, which was sad. We shouldn't be arguing about human health. It benefits all of us around the world. And we, as scientists, clinicians, business people, we want to do what's best for our patients and our shareholders. So all of that, and then economically, obviously those companies that were at the right place, right time, they got huge government funding. They got huge government contracts for these COVID vaccines. So I think to answer your question, it was tragic for the human race. A good thing because we recognized the importance of value of vaccines for those that were interested in taking them. I think that was really good. I think on the other side, we saw that even the best of health and the best of scientific motives can be used against you. I know Tony Fauci. I've known him for 40 years. He's unbelievable. Thank goodness we had someone like him. Because, he got most of his experience during the HIV days that we saw, 4 decades ago. So we learned a lot through COVID. I think it helped move technology forward. But it was kind of a strange time. But I think if anything, it shows that if you're trying to save the world, that biotech is probably a good investment because you're understanding biological systems that impact human disease. And knowing that these diseases aren't going away, it's a great way to continue to advance science and human healthcare.
Is the FDA, you feel, with all the, artificial intelligence, quantum computers, and all these different things that make computations and data and looking for those connections and algorithm, as the FDA, you think, kept up with the pace of innovation, or are they still, or are they hampering?
Yeah. The FDA gets a bad rap. We're actually in Maryland. We're about maybe 10 miles from the FDA. We know a lot of those people, and they're outstanding professionals, and they have a really difficult job. To your point, keeping up with the technology. Well, we only graduate so many IT, AI, computer people, a year. And most of them want to go to work at Google and Facebook and Apple. So we don't always get, the talent pool within our industry. And the government has a bigger problem because their wages usually are not as high as what you might see in industry. So whether you're looking at, like here, if you come to Maryland, you go and look at the curriculum at the Maryland universities and colleges, man, we're churning out cybersecurity folks. All these kids, they're all like, what's your major? Cybersecurity. What's your major? Cybersecurity. So everyone's doing that. I think with respect to the things when you talk about big data, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, it's going to impact everything. And it's going to have a huge impact on healthcare. Because what other industry do you have so many data points? You got billions of people. They all go to doctors multiple times a year. They all have different diseases. So I think the FDA, continues to try to stay on top of technology, but it never ends. And this is the challenge we even have in building biotech companies. What we start with today, by the time we even get to a clinical trial, or even to the marketplace where we're commercializing drugs, the science has changed, the technology changes, and it creates opportunities, but it's also going to force companies to work together. And while the IT folks are trying to hire all of these computer folks, obviously we want people. We used to call them bioinformaticists. Now we call them data analysts, AI folks, data visualizers. And yeah, I think in every branch or agency of the government, you're going to have a significant number of those people working on building systems. We have to do it for several reasons. One is just for them to kind of do what they need to do in reviewing and managing the drug approval process. But it also becomes a really important part of national security. I mean, you probably have read about the Biosecure Act coming out of Congress, where, you know, certain number of Congress folks are trying to put a halt on some certain interactions by Chinese companies. And, you know, the issue was really how data was being used. How is your data and my data being used? And, you know, people see that as kind of a threat to national security. On the other hand,
I mean, the change we've seen in globalism, right? I mean, we're seeing a big reversal of globalism, right? I mean, from a national security standpoint, I mean, I think COVID shined a light on that. I think a hot weather balloon shined a light on that. that was shot down. I mean, there's all kinds of things that are happening that globally aren't so great, right? So we're starting to see manufacturing come back to the United States, which I think is really good. What are your thoughts on that?
yeah, look, I'm pro international trade. You know, when the world is trading with one another, cooperating, collaboration, everybody increases their standard of life. So it's a good thing. You know, but obviously, you know, the job issue always comes into play. And as a matter of, you know, national security, you know, every country wants to maintain a certain production of the necessary and the latest chips for their computers, artificial intelligence, instrument, equipment. You know, the same thing with respect to, you know, kind of biotech. You know, people want to have, you know, the latest amount of information and tools available to them. I think to get to your earlier question, what did we learn about COVID? Well, what we learned about COVID is we had a huge gap in manufacturing capacity of vaccines. And it wasn't just us, it was the whole world. Everybody was kind of jumping around trying to figure out who's going to make these vaccines. And then the question is, it's only a finite supply, who is going to get them? So I think, you know, we're constantly seeing adjustments. In COVID, we learned about supply chains. And I think those supply chain issues are, to your point, Tim, bringing jobs back to the United States. It's also bringing jobs to other countries. So I think you're resetting the equilibrium, not so much on maybe the demand for chips or certain information, but the localization of those supply chains and making sure they're there when you need them. And I think that's kind of the transition we're making, Europe, Asia, et cetera.
All right, so let's talk about, you've got 96 million in cash. Yeah, how many shares outstanding fully diluted?
Yeah, so we have about a little over 27 million shares, no warrants, but yeah, there's a number of outstanding shares, no debt. So it's a very clean balance sheet.
Very, very clean, which is unusual for a small biotech, right?
Exactly. It shows our experience. We don't like that stuff.
Right, which is awesome. You've got, you know, 4 potential candidates, and are they phase 1, phase 2, how far along are we with the 2?
Yeah, so the lead program is in kind of phase 1B. The second program will be in phase 1, end of this year, beginning of next year. And then the other 2 programs, subject to partnering, you know, can be in the clinic as early as the second part of next year. So yeah, so these are real programs. They're not, you know, what we call research projects.
Right. So partnering, that could be a potential catalyst, right, for you guys in the next 6 to 12 months.
Exactly. And, you know, the beauty of a NextCure is the further these programs move forward, the more attractive they become on the partnering front.
Right. Well, I can tell you right now, so I lost my father to Alzheimer's. So
No, sorry to hear that. No, that's awful.
it is a brutal disease. It's interesting. When I first started getting into investing, The only thing I cared about was me, which was making money. I didn't care about anything else. That's why I got into investing. And then as I progressed, I got tired of hearing retail investors be the butt of jokes for Wall Street. And I wanted to try and make retail investors smarter investors. And I think I did a marginally poor job accomplishing that goal. But what's really come front full center for me is I came into this world with nothing. I'm 99% sure I'm leaving with nothing. So the only thing that really matters is what you do with your time while you're here, right? And there's this thing called impact investing. It's a very narrow definition, the way they define impact investing. I like to broaden it out and think to myself, okay, how do I impact a whole lot of lives in a positive way? And it has come to me that small companies that are trying to do amazing things and impact humanity in a positive way, if you can help those small companies go from being a small company to a billion-dollar corporation, how many lives does that impact? Right? So that's what it has become. My focus is the companies. And that's why NextCure is actually being interviewed by me, when typically I try to avoid retail investors. Well, I try to keep them away from biotechs because biotechs can be very painful, very, I mean, the cash burning machines, number one, right? And typically they're trying to come up with one drug. And I mean, it's a tough game. It is and like you said, a lot more biotech companies, a lot internationally, right? A lot more competition. So but this company right here, this is a seasoned team that has a plan, right? I mean, very unique strategy the whole way you're coming to market on this thing, right? And I think you guys are going to have a massive impact on humanity. That's my belief. And that's why we're having this conversation today.
Well, we share your perspective. You know, when we started out in this industry and we studied biology in school, you know, our choices were limited. We were either going to work in a hospital or a zoo. So it's either human poop or zoo poop, or, you know, whatever. But those were the choices. And when this industry took off, the passion that these scientists and clinical people and others bring to this industry is truly amazing. Because to your point, Tim, there's very few things you could do in today's world where you can have what I call the amplification effect. You could do a small experiment in a lab, and in 5, 6, 10 years, it could be a drug that could save millions of lives. And I've seen it happen so many times. You know, when I started out this industry, HIV, I was in San Francisco, HIV was a big problem. And it was like, oh, sheesh, you know, how are we going to develop the tools to clean up the blood supply? I was telling Tim earlier, I worked on a program on hepatitis C, and it's a great story because I was in the lab and there were 7 people, and everybody in the company wanted to cut this program but the founder. And these researchers, 7 people from 4 different continents, were kind of an eclectic group of scientific nerds, but had this passion for what they were doing. And they ended up identifying the virus for hepatitis C. And I was fortunate to be involved in that process. And the woman who actually sequenced the virus, I got to know so well. I've now been married to her for 35 years.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So, you know, but her boss, Mike Houghton, won the Nobel Prize a few years ago for the discovery. So when people say, well, I can't make an impact, I'm just an N of one, it's not true. It's not true. And I think this is what drives us every day. There's a need out there. But we get the best of the best because we get to do great science. We get to have a dream, a passion to help patients. We get to help work with investors and help educate them, and they educate us. We learn a lot from this. So this whole ecosystem really works. Now it gets out of balance every so often, and like now, we were talking about partnering. What's interesting is a lot of young companies can't go public. So now they're looking to in-license drugs or early stage drugs that pharma used to do, so they can then leverage that and enter the public markets. So the dynamics are evolving. And there's one thing I always tell young entrepreneurs: you have to adapt. You have to keep changing. If you came to our board meetings, our board members are like, another story? Like, what are you guys, Agatha Christie here? And I said, there's no mystery here, but you're constantly adapting to the changing times so that you can have that amplification effect in your science, in your clinical work, and to help patients. And that's what drives us. Obviously, there's always the economic component, and we take that very seriously, and the responsibility we have to shareholders. We have equal amount of responsibility as shareholders to patients. But what we try to do is connect the dots so that the system works. But it is a good feeling to wake up every day. Like Tim and I, we're here like 5 a.m. That's crazy. And the reason is you wake up and you just say, wow. And we come in here and we stop the sheep counting and we just kind of jump into talking science. And you go, well, like, what about this? And what about that? And I'm fortunate to be surrounded by a team of professionals that are just brilliant. But even then, last night we were on a call from like 6 to 8 p.m. with a recent chief medical officer of a company, and listening to their experiences on drug development and how things are changing, because we have to stay current so that we're adaptive, and that means sometimes reprioritizing programs, restructuring organizations, defining how our cash is spent so that we're investing in the programs for shareholders and patients. So yeah, there's a lot of things that we need to consider. But what you see if you come to NextCure, and if you're around here, please come visit us, is you'll just see the passion. It just kind of radiates off the wall, which is a good feeling.
Right. And I think that's why it's always important for me to get to know who the top dogs are in an organization, right? I mean, I have to feel their passion. And I mean, I've met with you several times, and there's no question. I feel your commitment and your passion. And like I said, I think you're going to have a huge impact on humanity. And I guess that's one of the things that the consumer or the retail investor doesn't really understand, is the amount of impact that they can have on a company that maybe is working towards, like you said, socially, anybody that's had a family member or a friend that has gone through dementia or Alzheimer's knows how painful it is for not just the patient, everybody around is impacted by that. It's just a horrible disease. So if that's something that means something to you, finding a company that's trying to change that. Now, I'm not saying every company is going to be successful in their goal, and you shouldn't just go buy any company. Do your research. But if somebody's making headway in something that you truly care about, right, that is going to impact future people that maybe don't have to go through the suffering and the pain of having a loved one with Alzheimer's, right? What is that worth? right? So instead of buying $1,000 pair of Nikes that you don't need, you put $1,000 into a company that's trying to make a difference, right? I think investors and consumers can have a much bigger impact on things if they just looked at things differently. That's how I see it, right? And that's my new goal. My new mission is, if you find something that you care about, and I don't care what it is, whether it's the environment or as it's a disease, or there is a company out there that I can assure you is trying to address the problem or trying to make things better. And they need your help, right? That's the whole point of investing. You become part owner and you're in it, no matter how insignificant it is, right? I mean, if they're a shareholder, they're a part owner, right? And they're doing their part to try and fix whatever it is or make better whatever it is that they care about. I think that's huge. That's the awesome thing about the stock market, right? It gives you that opportunity to have that kind of impact. So that's it. I'm going to get off my soapbox now.
No, it's really, really well said. And, we invest too. And, we love to be able to invest in, causes as well as companies. And, while we invest in, our science and our work, we also take quite seriously in NextCure investment in our employees, because they're the ones that are going to be the future generation that are going to run the next generation of biotech companies. And the more we train them and the more exposure they get to the ups and downs and turnarounds of what we have to experience, the better position they'll be. And I think if you talk to any young company, with new executives, they bring an equal amount of knowledge and perseverance, but there's a lot you got to learn along the way. And what we're trying in NextCure is Tim and I spend a lot of time with kind of our younger colleagues. They're having a great time. They don't I mean, but they're learning. It's like a Rubik's cube. Every day it changes, so they have to keep adapting. But but I really appreciate your story, Tim, and it certainly hits the heart. So thanks for sharing that.
No, so listen, this is our first meeting. This is a long one. It always is. The first one's always long. So what do you think we should do? When do you think we should do a follow-up?
Yeah, I think we should do maybe one, towards, the maybe early fall or so. We would love to have a follow-up and continue to keep you
have some data points out by then, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. I would bring up the chart, but for some reason I cannot get the chart to show up. But right now you've got the stock sitting at about what, $1.59 or so. It's got an interesting, this is an interesting area, actually. You've held well above $1. A dollar is always a psychological thing for people, right? I think between your 4 prospects and the fact that what's the market cap? What's the market cap on the company right now?
Yeah, it's about 40 or so.
Yeah, so let's just talk about that for a second. How much do you have in cash?
96 million as of the end of last quarter.
That's what I thought. And then, so 96 million, no debt. Do you have any assets?
A lot of assets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Building.
Our whole infrastructure, our manufacturing infrastructure, all the cutting edge equipment and instrumentation that we have.
All right, so you're not even trading at your cash value, what you have in the bank, right?
Correct.
Let alone the assets and the drugs in the pipeline. But to me, this is near level of stupidity when it comes to valuation, right? I think you have quite a bit going on here, and I don't think it's fairly valued. So it's sitting at about $1.59. The high, what's your all-time high? Is that like?
Yeah, we were pretty high up then, and when we first went public, we had some really good data. Yeah, it was that. What was it, like close to 90, Tim? Yeah,
Yeah, something like that.
It was what?
close to 90 at some point.
Really?
Yeah, and then our lead program failed, so we kind of crashed, and we've been in this hole for a while that we're trying to work our way out of.
I do have the right. I wish you guys could see my chart. I want to make sure. NXTC, I mean, that is the daily chart. Is that $1.59 is right? Is that
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yep.
Okay. I think that this is a very interesting place for if you're not in the stock, if you have interest in the programs, this would be an interesting place to take starter position, in my opinion, right? I think your all-time, you've managed to stay above $1, which is a good thing. He just recently had a big pop on a lot of volume. What was that all about?
Yeah, we did a reorganization of the company and prioritized, two of our key programs. And, a lot of people like ADCs. So I think a lot of institutional investors started coming in and continue to be interested in that space.
Okay. So you had a big pop, it's pulled back. The pullback is on lower volume, which is, great to see because it's not a lot of conviction on the pullback. So it looks to me like you kind of stair stepping higher. If I think biotechs have been out of favor for way too long, just like I think small caps have been out of favor for too long. I think the pendulum has swung way too far to one side, and at some point that pendulum will swing back the other way. So I think this is a story that if you were unfamiliar with, I think you want to make yourself familiar with it. You can sign up for their investment email alerts and, start paying attention to this story because I think it's just starting to get interesting. All right. All right, guys. So look, I want to thank you both for coming in and sharing the story, and we'll have another follow-up in the fall. And if anybody's got, if you're a legitimate investor and you've got some questions that you want, these guys are more than happy to take a phone call. Right?
Definitely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Tim. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and really appreciate the thoughtful questions, insightful comments, and yeah, we'll look forward to our next go around.
All right. Hold on one second, guys. I'm going to shut this off. Thank you for tuning in to another CEO and COO interview here at Alpha Wolf Trading. Today we had Michael Richman and Tim Meyer from NextCure, ticker symbol NXTC. I hope you enjoyed today's interview, and if you did, do us a favor, give us a like. How about giving us a share? And make sure you smash that subscribe button. All of those things are very important to us here at Alpha Wolf Trading, and we appreciate you taking the time to do that. Until next time, stay safe. Alpha Wolf Trading wishes you the very best of success.